All right, welcome back, everybody. Yes, so this is Two Recruiters and a Microphone. I am your co-host, Pete Cochran. I'm here with my partner,
Israel Swanson.
Here we go. Yes, and for all of those joining again, this podcast about executives. Like, oh, you got to say that, right? So it's about executives and people smarter than we are. That's the easiest way that I can say this. And we really want to share their stories. And today is the doctor.
The doctor.
The doctor. This is
Dr. Bob.
Dr. Bob. This is a fantastic conversation for all of those who do know him, specifically employees of RF Smart. You're going to know exactly how this is going to go, and it's going to be great. But if for all those who don't know him, just a huge, major influence on me personally, from really learning through listening, and I think that's what he talks about quite a bit. I mean, you had never met him, so talk to me about that. As you're like, this is your first impression.
First impression was, move over, Dr. Phil. We got Dr. Bob in the house. No, Dr. Bob, first impression, you know when you meet someone for the first time and just by shaking their hand, you're immensely like in awe of like, oh, you're just a genuinely good person. You
totally agree.
I'm a fan of Dr. Bob. I don't know I can't think of the words because he truly was. This was a great opportunity for me to meet someone that I had I
just didn't know, and then now you know.
Tongue-tied listeners. That's the Dr. Bob. That's what he does.
That's the influence that he has. He's just like, I don't even know. It's just different. Right?
And the reason that you find yourself tongue-tied is because I'm a chatty Cathy by and large, and after
you don't say
after you sit with Dr. Bob, you realize, oh man, maybe I should just take a minute and think about things before I just spew them out of my mouth.
Yes, very true.
Reflect on reflection. Reflect on what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it influences, how it hurts, how it all the things that you're personally capable of doing with your actions, business related, and just personally related. It's Dr. Bob is amazing. I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the influence that he had on me and through all those that work at RF Smart and know him and know that the training that he does there. It's a very humbling experience for you to go through that Talk Sense class with him.
Yeah,
and but it's even more exciting for me too. This is an opportunity for the listeners to hear a different side of Dr. Bob about how he came to what he's doing and the passion that he really has for doing this and passing this along. So, and not to be honest with you, we record this in Jacksonville. Big thanks to Dr. Bob for him coming all the way from Irvine, California, to sit in our Buzzsprout studio and do this. Cannot thank you enough, Dr. Bob. If you're listening to this, hopefully you will. But yes. So anyway, without further ado, this is our interview with Dr. Bob. Enjoy. Oh man, Dr. Bob, I'm here with you. I can't believe that I'm seeing you right in the flesh. I haven't seen you in a couple months now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yes, but thank you so much for joining Two Recruiters and a Microphone.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. I don't know who you are, so I'm looking forward to meeting the man that Pete obviously holds in such high regard.
That I do. Wow. Usually, well, first off, how are you?
I'm doing great.
How was the trip to wonderful Jacksonville?
Yeah, well, I've been on the road for about a week and a half now. Dallas, Atlanta, PA, Jacksonville. But it's always great to come to Jacksonville, and what a great time of year to come to Jacksonville.
A little bit beautiful today.
It's very nice.
Very, very nice. And you coming from Irvine, which is what, beautiful 362 days out of the year somewhere?
We do okay.
Give or take.
I'm guessing it wasn't as nice in PA.
It wasn't, but I've been lucky on this trip. It's been sunny, blue skies for the last 5 days, every city I've been in. So
nothing against UPA. I just,
Yeah, so that's a nice little stretch. We're glad to have you in the Buzzsprout Studios. Here we are in Jacksonville. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Usually start these right with the who, the what, the whys, right, of Dr. Bob.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and kick it off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, your background, and your story.
Yeah, well, I'm a psychologist by training. I'm actually a child psychologist by training, and that's always come in handy in my work with corporate executives.
That you do.
Yes. And I trained on the mental health side. After grad school, I went to Colorado State. After grad school, I joined the Army. So I was active duty Army from 2000 through 2005. And, great experience. The Army showed me the world. But it was during those 5 years that I started, thinking about organizational consulting. I started doing work with company commanders around the link between leadership and unit well-being and so on. So when I got out in 2005, I started doing this type of work, and in various forms have been doing it ever since. So I guess that's nearly 20 years, which is kind of crazy.
That is. And you started in 2000, right? So that's what you said, 2005. So you started during September 11th. What kind of impact did that have?
Yeah. So I was, I did my first year at Eisenhower Army Medical Center, and then was in Fort Sam for some training when September 11th happened. As a matter of fact, I remember we were out in the field, and the lieutenant colonel called all of us. This was before cell phones and all this stuff. And the lieutenant colonel called us into the amphitheater there on Camp Bullis, and shared, hey, the Pentagon's been hit by an airplane. They're shutting down all the airports, the World Trade Center, et cetera. And I remember thinking to myself, man, they really have to come up with more realistic training scenarios, because there was no way to validate this. No. But of course, it turned out to be very real. It changed a lot of things in the Army. By that time, I had my assignment to Germany. So
okay. So you were already going to Germany before?
I was on my way to Germany from
Got it.
Fort Sam to be with the 1st ID and 1st Infantry Division. We were supposed to deploy in the first rotation in. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was the Turkish parliament ultimately decided not to allow invading forces through northern Iraq.
Okay.
We were supposed to be part of that group. So the Turkish government didn't permit that. So we were part of the 2nd rotation in. Okay. So 2004, 2005. We relieved the invading force. So we were there for a year.
Okay.
Yeah. Then finished there in February 2005. 90 days back in Germany, and then out from there.
Right. And so during that time, right, and I can imagine, especially even from a psychology perspective, PTSD, you're working with a lot of different soldiers. I can't even imagine, what was going on. First off, thank you for your service, which I should have already said that. So,
it was an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. But that started getting you more into that psychology mindset, right? Mm-hmm. What kind of impact did serving have on you from that perspective?
Well, I think ultimately it was, that year in Iraq, it was good. It was good in a lot of ways, but, there were just a lot of, I was 32 at the time, and I was like one of the old men, right? Everyone is 18 to 24. And, there were just
the old guy that coming in the room.
That's right. And there were just a lot of young men down there that were doing their duty, but under a lot of pressure in an austere environment. And the woman they had just married, who was their new wife, was they weren't getting along on the home front and so on. So there was just a lot of understandable distress. Ultimately, I decided, okay, maybe I need a break from clinical work, and that's kind of what got me down the consulting path, and has really kept me on that ever since. So,
right. When was the first time? So when you got back to the States, and when was the first time you realized from an organizational development, right? And that was the track. That's what I wanted to do from a consulting perspective. And I know we're going to fast forward into Talk Sense too, but because I do obviously love that story about how you met Barry and all that kind of stuff. But when you got back, was it just instant? I'm going to just go into this, and this is what I want to do, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I got out of the service, I was going to take another job because so I had this assignment. I was in Germany for 4 years, and I thought, it's going to be kind of hard to find a job back in the U.S. from Germany. Let me get back there and look, get back to the U.S., take an assignment for a year and look for a job. And then after about month 9 in Iraq, I was like, no, I'm going to take my chances. It's time to go. So then I started applying for jobs, and I was looking at some clinical jobs and some consulting jobs. And there's a lot of twists and turns on that journey. But ultimately I was ready to try something different. So I landed with a small firm in Atlanta. Great experience, great group of professionals. And that got me started down this path. Things have shifted and evolved since that time, but that was my first taste of, you can work with really talented, high-functioning people and be of service and make a difference for the better. So that was...
And that was with an executive consulting firm as well. That's when, so it was right
a group
off
of
the bat,
psychologists
starting to work with
right away.
So business, so large, small, any executive. Was that where?
Yeah, we were working with some large companies doing some international work, heavy on the pre-employment selection side. So a lot of report writing, a lot of assessment writing, and I acknowledge that's not my strength. I like people too much, so it's hard for me to say, thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm probably not your guy for that, but because of my fundamental belief in most people.
Right.
So,
right.
Are you originally from California?
No, Pennsylvania originally.
Okay, so
yeah.
So you're very familiar with PA then.
Oh,
in
yes,
the weather.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
Full circle.
Yeah,
back to the weather, PA.
Yeah.
So PA off there, then into California, or Atlanta. But when did you get to California? How long have you been out there?
Since 2008.
Okay. What drew you there?
So when I was in Iraq, my wife, we married in grad school, or right before grad school. She came to Germany, and I was going to be gone for a year plus, so she could have stayed in Germany or gone somewhere else. And the way it works there, if you're on a military assignment as a spouse, there's not a lot of employment opportunities, especially if all the soldiers are gone. So she went back to the U.S. She had some friends in San Diego. Really enjoyed time there. Understandably so.
Pretty in San Diego.
Understandably so. So we got back to, job one, getting out of the Army, was getting on the ground with the job and taking care of that. And then, I had just had my eye on California and found another small firm looking for someone like me, and did that in the months prior to basically the unraveling of the economy in 2008. If I hadn't taken that job in January of 2008, I don't know if California would have happened, at least in that time frame.
So when you got out there, and I know you went to another firm, and I remember you and I've talked about this in the past, and I always love inflection points, right? Like when you're, especially from people wanting to go out on their own. I mean, here Israel and I are kind of like what we're doing, right? I mean, we've never done a podcast before. This is the uncomfortableness of what we're doing. So, can you talk a little bit about the time when you're working with a firm and you decided, like, I think I want to do this by myself. I want to go out on my own, and maybe I can be more somewhat successful or beyond successful.
Right. Well, it was never part of the plan.
It never usually is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But working in a small firm and figuring out what partnership or ownership looks like can get kind of complicated, right? People have different views of what makes sense, and we the fellow I was working with at the time, we waited quite some time to start getting into the details, and then it took quite some time to try to get our arms around how do we do this and so on. And at a certain point in the process, I realized, okay, wait a minute, this is a business decision I have to make. I was kind of complicating it with my belief in people and, wanting to have good relationships and so on. But I just had to get my head around, okay, this is business. And I had to look at it in that way. But, the emotional part of it was quite strong for me. The image or the metaphor that I often use to describe that is it felt like, because, when you're going, my wife was at home with our daughter, so I was the income in the family, right? And I felt like, as I was considering making this leap to going solo, I felt like I was kind of standing on the edge of a cliff looking into some kind of foggy chasm. And I wasn't sure, do I want to jump into this? And I wasn't sure how deep it was. Ultimately, I decided to jump. If I just looked at the risk-benefit analysis, it made more sense to jump. And I discovered that the chasm was only about 3 feet deep. So, I was prepared for a long fall, and it was just a short hop.
Wow.
So I picked myself
I'm
up.
above the fog still.
That's
wow,
right.
This is great.
That's right. It was thick fog.
It was thick, but man, I can't
But
see
it was-
my
It's
feet,
only
but
covering my ankles.
Yes. So then I was able to, quickly build some momentum and stay alive and so on. And I think that's what everyone hopes for when they make a move like that. And
Absolutely.
It's
How old was your
affirming.
daughter at the time?
How old? 7.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
7-year-old breadwinner. I'm going to take this. Wow.
Yep.
That must have been very, very scary.
Yeah. I tell my wife I took about, 3 weeks worth of decision making and packed it into 6 months. Just second guessing and
Right.
thinking through the possibilities and procrastinating and so on. So, but once I made the decision, then it felt like things kind of took care of themselves.
Right. And so when you went out there and you went out on your own, and you said that you picked up momentum pretty quickly, did you find yourself what was like day 1 like? What was day 90 like? What was you just picking up the phone?
In going solo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was picking up the phone, like, trying
I
to
offer this, right? So here's my message.
Yeah. Well, by that time, I had been consulting for 10 years.
Okay.
So I'd built up a network and
Right.
so on. I think in consulting, there's probably 2 ways. There's probably more ways now, but at least when I was starting, it was 2 ways. Either you have a book and you build some notoriety that way and draw people in, or you have a network.
Yep. Did you change up what you were offering at the time, or when you went solo, or was it just like, here, I found my strength over those 10 years, and I'm just going to hyper focus on, if I've got 10 things, I'm going to focus on 2. And what really were those 2 when you made that decision? And it couldn't have been 2; it could have been 10. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I would say I'm in like the 3rd version of what I do.
Okay.
So Atlanta was a lot of I'm typically working with corporate clients on the human side, right? How do you work more effectively with others, either through heightened self-awareness or improved interpersonal skills and so on. And when I first started doing this work in Atlanta, it was very much about trying to predict people's effectiveness. I was doing a little bit of intervention type work, coaching, maybe workshops, but that was the exception. It was a lot of assessment related work. And, my fundamental trust towards my fellow man made it so that I probably wasn't the best at that. So when I moved to this, one of the things that appealed to me about the group in Atlanta or the group in Los Angeles was the emphasis on intervention at the team level, working with intact groups of leaders, intact leadership teams around things like team purpose, team dynamics, decision-making, conflict resolution, things like that. So I did that for probably 2008 through 2017, and that bridged the time when I went solo. So I more or less did the same thing, and I still kind of do the same thing, but that was chapter 2.
So in chapter 2, and I love stories. So can you tell us a story about one of your most challenging clients that you just looked at and go, there's a lot of work to do here. Where do I even start?
Yeah.
I would love to hear one of those. Of course, no client name.
Yeah,
sure.
Sure. Well, I think maybe the way I'd answer that is I learned some things during that time that I still rely on today. And I would say the worst teams, the teams that are the leadership teams that are the most distressed that I've talked to, the ones that have the least, the ones that defy my optimism.
That's a very nice way in saying it.
Yeah.
I know you're good with words.
Yes.
That was a good one.
Yeah. They always have two things in common. Mm-hmm. Number one, you have a leader who is not the leader. And there's tools I use to measure this and so on. But what that means basically, leadership is about exercising influence. You have to, especially in a team environment, you have to be setting the cultural tone. And to be setting the cultural tone in the team, you have to have an impact, right? So you have to have attention and influence and so on. So there are ways of measuring that. And a leader doesn't have to be number one, right? But they kind of need to be in the top tier of the group, generally speaking. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. Quick decisions, make decisions quickly,
or not
effectively.
Maybe not even quick, but just central to the functioning of the team, right?
Right. Empathetic.
Right.
In some way.
That's part of it.
Yep.
But just not sitting on the sideline, not hesitate, no wallflowers.
Okay.
Which is not. I'm not saying introversion is antithetical to effective leadership. It's not that at all. Because leaders who are introverted can be highly influential, but it's fundamentally about having influence in the team, right? Credibility, influence, impact in the group. And there's probably 1,000 routes to that.
Right.
But does the group reference the leader regularly? Does the team see the leaders having power?
Right.
So the most troubled teams, leader is not the leader.
Right.
That is,
you feel the group is the leader. Right?
Or
this maybe is even like an individual.
This is problem number two.
Okay.
And I should say, I've seen groups where the leader isn't the leader, they still function okay. So this is not like the death knell of effective teams, but it opens the door to the real problem. And the real problem is when you have a highly influential member of the team who behaves in a self-interested way. Then that just creates a very primitive environment where it's really hard to trust, and it's kind of like every person for themselves. So I saw that a number of different ways, and usually for a team like that to turn around, it requires you got to change that roster.
Yeah, tough decisions.
Yeah,
right?
You're talking about the George Costanza syndrome.
Yeah, how so? How so?
Well, I'm a huge Seinfeld fan,
Yes.
which is Pete.
Oh, yeah.
When you think of, all of them are terrible people. Don't get me wrong. Right. So, but George is, his self-interest goes beyond what is like. It's not even. You don't even have to try to find it. It's like, oh, what is it with George? Oh, he's absolutely the most self-interested person.
Exactly.
And when you were talking about, the individual that can only think of themselves or they're doing it, is when George is at that birthday party and there's a fire and he starts tossing kids out of the way so he could get out.
I think he knocked over the grandma on his way out.
Yes.
And that's when, yeah.
Like, and
he was like, I was the first. I had to go out. I had to save everybody else.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to like the hero versus the anti-hero. It's like the hero is fighting and saving the world. The anti-hero has the capability to do it, but it's not necessarily the group that he's trying to save. It's that one individual thing. Mm-hmm. It's not saying that he's doing it. It's not necessarily always selfish, but it is in a way because it's.
I agree with that. You talk to that. You talk to George. He's going to have good reasons for doing what he does.
Right.
Or at least George reasons.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's what I found. Like you talk to the self-interested team member, they're going to give you a story that, there's a logic to it. They're looking out for their teams. They're trying to do what's right, et cetera. So, and I've seen that enough times that that's the problem. Because if you have someone like George and a weak leader, it's a mess.
Would you say that now in your career, when you walk in to a team and you're not even past the pleasantries of shaking hands and, you know, the babies and the kissing and the high fives, and you've already identified, like, is there a tell, like right out of the gate? Or is there a question, that one thing where it's like, and I'm going to start off with this question, and then boom, you're like, oh, and you're George, and you're George.
You have multiple Georges.
Oh,
you have a major problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got too many Costanzas in the rim.
Yeah.
Can't stand you.
You know, I'd love to say there's a kind of one incisive question I have, but it's something that I probably uncover through a conversation about what's going on in the team. And that's certainly one of the patterns I look for.
Okay.
I just know that there's a lot of work ahead if that's what's happening.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even the step one, right, where you know the leader's not the leader. I would love to know too, is like when you have that very hard conversation with that leader who thinks they are the leader, and you have to tell them that they're not the leader. They've lost the trust of the team. That's a very hard conversation for anyone to take, to be honest. So in those stories as a consultant coming in, it almost kind of reminds me also of Office Space. Like, it's the Dr. Bob. The Bobs are here to talk to me.
Right.
Yeah. So like when you come in and have to tell that to a leader and say, you've lost the trust. What are we going to do to get it? Or is there, here's the door.
What would you say you actually do?
Here. Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's
I'm a people person.
right. That's a tough one, and it it pivots on the relationship,
Right.
and doing it in a way, having that conversation in a way where it's both honest, but not blaming.
Well, this kind of leads into learning,
Right.
like learning by listening, right? Which
Right.
we'll talk about later. But
Right.
yeah, I can imagine that being I don't know how I would be able to go, like, you're paying me to tell you that you're not the leader.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, here's my check.
Yep.
Right.
Check's
Here's
in
the bill.
mail.
Here's the bill.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can imagine it being really tough. So, but, yeah, you don't have to share stories on that. I could just feel that would be a very
Oh, yeah,
difficult
it's
conversation. Probably too many to tell, I would assume, but yeah.
It gets kind of hairy,
Right.
Right.
And even in the flip side of that, right? Number two, going to a leader and saying, you do have too many Costanzas in the room. We have to make a roster change. As a leader, I would go, well, I have a lot of work to do. I'm willing to put up with the Costanzas. And you're like, well, you can do that, but you're going to be in there is going to be an impact downstream. Maybe not right now, but
Yeah.
the Costanza's going to win.
Can I show you what technical debt looks like?
Right.
Right. Well, it would be unusual for me to come in and say you've got to make roster changes. What I do get pretty clear about is you need to make some changes. The team needs to make some changes, and that can happen one of two ways, right? People can leave,
Right.
or they can grow.
Right. And it's the human side of you, right?
Right.
Like I trust you. You're going to get
Right.
better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, putting some pressure on to kind of support that journey and supporting it with maybe some skill building and so on. But yeah.
Right. So you started to refine this in LA. This is when you started to really identify, okay, you're the leader. There's a Costanza for the next phase, right? So now in the third phase of your career, what did that look like?
Well, I think that phase started. So when I was in Atlanta, I learned by reading. So I was ordering all kinds of books around, like, well, what does it mean to consult organizations and so on. And I came across this book. It's called Knowledge for Action, and it was simultaneously incredibly dull, but I also could tell that there was some genius in there because the authors were writing about this idea of they were writing about organizational politics and what it is that maintains counterproductive organizational politics. And the model they used was this idea of unilateral control versus mutual learning. And most people, when the stakes are high and reputations are on the line, they want to win and be right? They want this unilateral control model. So
Right.
that really piqued my interest. I knew it was rock solid, but I couldn't figure out how to convert that in a meaningful way into consulting work. But it was always running in the back of my head. And then some years later, but it would have been, 10 years later, I'm a bit of a footnote geek. If I'm reading someone, I want to understand, well, who are they referencing? What's the bibliography and so on? And I came across this footnote that changed the course of my professional life. And the footnote said, this was in a book by an author I have a lot of respect for. And the footnote said, I'm forever indebted to Barry Gents for teaching me how to show executives that they don't listen as well as they think they do. And I thought, that's a pretty powerful endorsement.
Yeah. Not only that, that's a very powerful footnote.
Yes, right. So I thought, that's interesting. And
who is this Barry?
Who is this Barry? So I just started doing some poking around, and I found Barry. He taught at Harvard for 30 years, and I saw that he was doing some work with videotape. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. Putting leaders on videotape, and you probably see this most commonly in presentation training, public speaking training,
totally role playing, all that kind of stuff. Yep.
So I thought,
not common in just anything, right? Because
or you see it in golf, you see it in tennis, you see it in sports, right? Athletes put themselves on video. I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. So then I called Barry up, and I found out he was connected to, in some ways, to the author of that first book I found in 2005. I thought, this is just getting more and more interesting. So I went up there in March of 2017 and asked him to kind of show me what he did.
So you reached out to him yourself and just say, I want to. So what was that? How did you sell that? How did you sell yourself? As I read this book, I saw this footnote. I just want to meet you.
Yeah, I don't remember. But I just was probably complimentary and said, hey, this is interesting. I'd love to start off with emails. Right. I don't have those emails anymore, but I just, and he was receptive, and we just started.
Video, Dr. Bob. You're going on video.
That's right. So we just started a conversation, and we came to an agreement, and it's become a friendship. And, that videotape work now has become central to the work that I do.
It's again changed the trajectory.
Yeah, changed everything. I tell Barry, I had been reading a lot in this space around mindset and adult development and so on. And it's one thing to talk about how people grow and change and develop. It's another thing to show them what that looks like and talk at the level of, hey, if you want to grow as a leader, what do you say in this meeting on Tuesday? So I tell Barry there was a Talk Sense, that's the name of the methodology. There was a Talk Sense shaped hole in the work that I did. I just didn't know what went there. So it was the videotape stuff. And so I
remember when I went through Talk Sense with you, you had that story, but you also had that, it's just, it just changed everything for you. But when you read the book, it was just really impactful for me to just see that, that impact that it had for you. So it's really fascinating that you took the leap and reached out to him. To find that takes a lot of guts, right? I mean,
well, and I was a bit desperate too. Solo employee. I was probably only solo for a year at that point.
Okay.
So 2015, and things were going fine, but I could just feel like, all right, I need some inspiration here.
Right. So you meet him, changes everything, right? And then you just start selling that.
Well, then you got to convince people to go on videotape.
Which is, yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And since.
How did that work out first?
Yeah. Well, and since people love role plays and they love to see themselves on video.
Both things.
It's a winner. It's a winner.
It's green and green. Sign me up.
Right.
Who doesn't like those two things?
That's right. So,
especially to identify all the things that are wrong within the company and the team.
That's right. In public, and we're going to watch my video in a room full of people.
Right.
On video, you just proved you are the Costanza. So this is good.
That's right. I talked to people that I knew that I'd been working with that I thought would find it interesting. And I came across some people. Sometimes you meet people and it's serendipitous and they're looking for what you have. So it was a bit of luck, a bit of salesmanship, but I found some people and And that what typically happens is people have such an eye-opening experience with it that they're
I personally did.
Well,
so,
it goes deeper in the organization. Now, I'm not convinced. Either it goes deeper in the organization. They're like, oh, we need you to work with this group and this group. Either it's because they value what they learn so much, or they want other people to experience this unique form of torture themselves. It's one of the two. I think it might be a little bit of both.
Hey, you and I were driving over to the studio today, and we were talking about like when you do this individually compared to the class. And Israel, I can say this, and into all the listeners, when you get to see this video of yourself in front of your peers and they're all judging you, it's even more like, oh man, I don't want to show this. And I remember doing it, and I was like, I was nervous. Everybody was nervous going into the class. It's just very fascinating.
Yeah. And what were you afraid of, Pete? I mean, what was it that made you nervous?
So I'll say this. So you said something else, and I'm not even going to try to paraphrase it. I'm going to ask you, but if you didn't have the video and you were trying to tell a leader, are you an effective listener? What would they say?
They say, yeah. I mean, it's one of the jokes I make. You know, I at the beginning of the workshop, I show this list of things leaders should do, and I tell them, and I mean this, I said, if we didn't have these videos, I would tell you, these are the things you need to do as a leader. You would tell me, yeah, I do those, and we'd be done. But it's the video that demonstrates the person I think I am is not the same person as the person I actually am.
Right. And that's the fear, right? That's the fear that I had, right? And not even knowing anything, right? Just going, okay, there's a video. I know that. We're going to do something on this video. I don't know what this is.
Right. And you're a pretty flexible guy. Like, you'll roll with anything. So for this to make you anxious.
Oh, I was anxious. Yeah. I was very, very anxious.
Did you realize that on tape you actually look like a slob and you're not actually put together?
Thank you very little.
Yeah.
Wow. That's why this is only on audio.
Right. I thought I was professional looking. Now that I see myself on video,
wow. My shirt's not ironed.
I've got ketchup on my collar.
And I got that from yesterday. No, it did teach me a lot. It was a humbling experience, I think, and I think that's to your point about, and when I was growing up in sales, and just like you, I can't even tell you how many role plays, right?
Oh,
as
my
a
gosh.
recruiter, we would always have role plays, the manager would call
Monday
you.
morning, guys, let's get the team together and let's do some role plays.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go.
Eye rolls immediately, right?
Man, immediately.
Who wants to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember
Ring. Okay. Who wants to be the client? I'll be the client.
It was constant.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the Monday morning. Each Monday you dread. Yeah, I remember even going through training. I was 21 years old, and it was the final day of training of recruiting. And they said, okay, cool, we're all going to role play. And we all had phones in front of us, right? This is in 2000. And we all sat around. There's like 13 of us.
Landlines.
Oh, yeah. Of course, landlines. Yeah. Dial-ups, right? Like, the whole AOL thing. And we got a phone call. And the guy's just hammering me, just like about like the rec and about he's supposed to be he was a candidate that I was trying to convince for a job, but he was just saying no this every single time that I was saying. And all of a sudden I would finish and they would move to the next one and the next one and the next one, all 12 of us. And little did we know it was the CEO of the company doing that to us. So all of a sudden the CEO came down and was like, I was the guy doing this all too. So even more, maybe that helped me feel a little bit better after years. When you and I talked about my video, I was like, oh man, back in 2000, I had a similar experience. Yeah. Yeah, but it is humbling, and that's why I think it goes back to that. You just never know, and even with role playing in general, but on video, right? You get to capture that. So, but going back to convincing companies about that, and even investing in something like that, over that hump that you got. Fast forward to now, right? Do you find that a lot of people companies are interested in understanding how they present themselves on video, because that's more likely how I'm going to be presenting myself in an in-person meeting. Yep. And actually, now that I think of it, post-pandemic, most meetings now happen virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And where we came from, that wasn't virtual, right? We
Right.
used to get a meeting, get in front of them, have breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever. Now I can think that you'd have even more impact on someone because people are very used to just working from home and having those meetings and even having some conflicts, right? How do you do that virtually? So have you seen a rise in that after the pandemic or not so much?
I can't say. I don't think that's not the way in, right? Like so, what would cause someone to seek out this unique form of torture
Yeah.
is kind of what you're asking, right? Like
Yeah.
what would
Right.
what's someone thinking? It's never the videotape is the vehicle.
Yep.
It's the active ingredient. But and no one wants to do it. So why would people sign up for this? It's because they see the costs. I mean, ultimately, remember I talked about this idea of unilateral control versus mutual learning. In simple language, what most people do when stakes are high and reputations are on the line, they want to win and be right. Right? We view being effective as being right.
Right.
And oftentimes, the position I'm taking, if I'm just a person involved in a situation like that, because what you end up getting is the person in sales wants to be right, and the person in software development wants to be right, and
It feels always so good to be right.
oh man, it's beautiful,
doesn't
isn't
feel
it?
good
It's beautiful. The
to be
moral high
wrong.
ground. The view is great from the moral high ground.
The water's fine.
Yes. What ends up and the tricky thing about it is the salesperson is right in the sense that, well, based on what they see and what's important, this is the solution. And the software development person is right based on what they see and what's important and what the solution is. So what ends up happening is you have people either across functions or within teams, each advocating their solution to a given problem, and the solutions don't match up, right? And each person that's a party to that, since I'm right, like I see these facts, and any reasonable person would interpret these facts in this way, no one's going to put down their solution. Like everyone's going to just try to figure out ways to, maybe we'll compromise around some stuff, but like I need to get my solution to win the day.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm always going to go back to mine, right?
That's right.
My self-interest.
That's right. And as I've started calling this the here we go again loop, right? Like you're in a meeting and, people are just kind of going back and forth. You're wasting 10 minutes, 15 minutes where people are debating a point. It seems to be going nowhere. Everyone is listening to respond rather than to understand. Team leader has to intervene, or some senior person has to intervene to move the conversation forward. And the problem that creates is it moves the conversation forward, but it now becomes the senior leader's decision rather than the team decision, right? So you don't get the same level of commitment and so on.
Right.
So you get these here we go again loops that.
Right. And we're going to do a meeting about another meeting.
That's right.
Let's put a pin in it. That's my favorite. Let's we're going to circle back. We're going to circle back to this pin.
Circle back is
Well,
always
this
a great
first
term.
of all, we're circling back to something that's irrelevant, and it's like, why is there a pin, and why are we circling back to the thing?
to that pin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're out of time, so we'll just pick up back up at our standing Tuesday meeting next week.
Yes.
And again, here we go again.
Here we go again. You end up having the same meeting next Tuesday, right? I
I've been there.
Yes, you know.
Oh my gosh.
You know it.
Yes. Very much so.
That's
I had the same meeting for 18 months.
because
I ultimately lost my job after.
You became the Costanza.
Right. Yeah, I guess if you don't know who the Costanza is, you're the Costanza.
If you can't identify the Costanza in the room, you might want to look in the mirror.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, that's funny.
So it's that thing. That's because here's the issue. Well, everyone thinks everyone else is the Costanza.
Right.
I'm not the Costanza. I could see two Costanzas right in front of me. It's not me. It's you.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, I'm a Costanza too.
Right.
That's what the videotape demonstrates.
I really hope Seinfeld never listens.
That's
to this.
right.
I'm just
Yeah,
gonna be honest.
that's right.
We're gonna have to
And
pay a lot of-
everybody's actually just hiding under their desk eating a sandwich. Yeah.
That's right.
This is not copyrighted by
No.
Seinfeld by
Yes.
any means, but continue.
Yes, disclaimer.
Disclaimer.
We are not accepting any money from Larry David, right? Although we would.
Yes.
So
So the videotape is just a way to literally and metaphorically turn the camera back on each participant, because it feels so good for me to think it's not me, it's Israel. And
Right.
and in a way I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
But Israel is thinking the same thing about me, and he's right too, right?
Yep.
So the only person I can change is myself. I mean, here's the paradox of it all. If I can stop trying to change Pete
Mm-hmm.
and I just focus on my own learning,
Right.
Pete actually becomes more open to change. It's the opposite of what we think,
Right.
right.
right? We want to we want to convince other people to do things. And there's nothing wrong with trying to convince people, but people resist being convinced that what they believe is right is wrong.
100%.
They resist it, as they should. It would be irresponsible to
Yeah.
roll over.
Yeah, the
right?
first thing is defensiveness, right?
Right.
You're telling me that I'm wrong. I'm immediately going to be like, no,
I'm not wrong.
Right.
I'm not
I
wrong.
didn't do anything wrong.
Right?
Right.
What,
Prove it.
That's right. That's right.
You got 5 minutes to prove it.
Yeah.
Or get out of my office.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's if I'm going into an unfamiliar situation, that's why people are bringing me in, because they recognize that, all right, we've tried some of the familiar stuff, maybe personality testing and, ropes courses and so on. And that stuff can be quite
Team
useful.
building.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But some problems have a lot more roots than that, right? And people have teams to protect and reputations to protect and organizational priorities they're pursuing. So the skill set we work on with the videotape is actually helping people grow their way out of the problem. Usually it's not a question of, I think we live oftentimes under the impression that it's either or, right, wrong.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. You agree to disagree.
Right,
move
right.
on.
Agree, disagree. I'm not changing. You don't have to change. Let's just run parallel play, right?
You go away. I'll go away. We
That's
go
right.
away.
No pins. No pins. No circling back. And yeah, that's a way to survive, but it's not a way to create something valuable. Like here's I think one of the most flawed, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I'll go with it. One of the most flawed pieces of advice in organizations is this idea of picking your battles.
Mm.
But it's common advice.
Oh, that's very common.
Very common
Right.
advice,
Yeah,
right?
Stay in your lane. Pick your own battles.
Pick your battles.
Move on.
Right? So why the advice on one level makes sense. If it's either or, win, lose, right, wrong, well, then you can't fight every battle. You don't have enough time in your day to fight every battle, right? Especially for people that are one or two ranks above you, right?
Right.
So
You're
from
probably always going to lose that
that's
battle.
right. From a survival standpoint, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think what that ends up creating is that certain topics can't be discussed, right? And the reason there is a battle is because they're important topics. We don't have battles over what type of coffee we're going to order in the. I mean, maybe it's possible, right? Then I can't help. I can't help.
Right?
But
We're calling you Dr. Bob because we can't choose the coffee.
right.
Well,
So-
I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that I have been at a company and I went into the kitchen and I looked at all the coffee that they had brought in. And it's like, did we not order any just coffee? Like I don't want blueberry or Cinnabon coffee.
That's right.
Like why do we only have flavored coffee?
right.
And I did have to escalate it to a higher power because this will not stand.
And did they say?
Oh, they
pick
fixed
your,
it.
Oh, I thought they were going to say pick your battles.
No,
Even
yeah.
better. Stay in your lane, Israel. That's operation.
No, the funny thing is when I took it to a higher power, I'm like, hey, there's no just coffee, and there was some expletives that I received back. Are you kidding me? There's like what kind of circus are we running here?
What do you say you do here, Israel?
Yeah,
You're
Anyway.
caring about coffee. But it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So picking your battles, people care about stuff. And, if I'm going to pick my battles, it means what? I'm not going to talk about some of this stuff. I think it just reinforces this win, lose, right, wrong. If we stop thinking about these interactions as battles to win or lose, and to be clear, this is not like moral relativism. Every opinion is equal and so on. Leaders have to make decisions. And you oftentimes have to make decisions that people don't like.
Oh, the hard decisions. It's
Right.
the hard things about hard things, right?
That's right. That's right.
Andreessen Horowitz. I think
That's right.
actually wrote
But also
that.
the one, I guess the funniest thing to me about picking battles is we're already then acknowledging that there's more than one. And if we're only picking one, this other battle is raging.
Right.
Do you know how many
it's
countries have lost because the general was like, we're going to go this way.
Right.
And then they get flanked.
Yes.
It's like, oh, okay, well. And then when someone confronts you about that battle that you did not pick, oh, no. I did not pick that one. So we're not going to touch on that because I picked this one over
Right.
here.
That's
We're gonna,
right.
We're going to stay over here.
That's right. You have to basically ignore things.
Right.
If picking battles is the
right.
advice.
Which then builds up in your career, and that's usually, I would assume, why most people leave. Like there's just too much, even beyond just career. That's just personal. Like,
Yeah.
that's life in general.
Yeah.
That okay, I'm going to move on from this because I didn't pick enough battles to solve, and then I just
And you can apply that to anything.
I would say, yeah.
Parenting,
Right.
relationships, marriage,
It's
like
life.
family, all of it. It's like you're setting yourself up for someone to have animosity.
Right.
And because you're not addressing it,
Right.
and it's not necessarily, we're not looking for a fight. We're just looking to acknowledge the elephant in the room
Right.
and say, and it could be as easy as be like, there's an elephant in the room. Has anybody
Can you see
tell
that?
me that there's an?
Right.
Is anyone else seeing this elephant?
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is where it really starts to get tricky because we're not looking for a fight, but we often behave in ways that provoke fights.
Gotcha.
Right. That's what the videotapes.
Because you're casting stones.
That's right. Or I'm stuck on my point of view. Right. And if your point of view is different than mine and I'm right, well, then you must be wrong. So
right.
it would be irresponsible for me to agree to disagree with something that's wrong.
Right.
So, so what's the alternative? I think leaders have to be skilled learners.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I go back to this idea, you've heard me put it this way, Pete. If I ask people, hey, is transparency, if I'm at a workshop, I'll ask people, hey, is transparency important for leadership? All the hands go up.
All of them.
People aren't transparent. That's what the videotapes show us. I ask people, is listening important for leadership, right? All the hands. Of course. I mean, if this were a test of leadership, people would be passing it with flying colors.
100, A+. I'm done.
You have potential. You have potential.
Right. And here's $100,000.
That's right.
I'm going on break.
That's right. But the fact of the matter is we know these things to be important, but we don't do them because there's a knucklehead over here that's trying to tell me something that I know is wrong is right. And I can't invest myself in understanding that. So that's what happens. So we're not looking for the fight, but we behave in ways that bring the fight.
Yeah.
And we often don't see ourselves as participating in it. Why is Pete being so difficult? Well, if I ask
Which was Pete? Oh, the slob. You saw the video.
That's right.
The
Thank you very much,
disheveled guy.
That's right.
Gosh, you guys are doing great for me today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I guess this is my last time on the podcast.
It's because Pete, you're so successful. When you're on the street and people are like, that can't be Pete Cochran. I've listened to the podcast and he looks like a stand-up guy. The podcast Pete, he's disheveled and
now you saved it.
Scraggly.
So, I take back. I'm back on the podcast.
Yeah, you're back.
I lost the thought there, so he really messed me up. I was not listening. I wasn't really.
Dr.
learning
Bob
what
was
you were
talking about fighting.
Yes, that's right. And it happened.
saying. Yes, exactly, right in front of you.
Yeah.
and we resolved it.
Yeah.
So it's all,
Okay.
it's all good.
So yeah, that's I mean, you talked earlier, Israel, about how it you mentioned like marriages and friendships and all these domains. I mean, so often I find that the skills that we talk about and talk sense, the first place people apply them is at home.
Mm-hmm.
I can attest to that. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's but it's funny because it's not funny. In business, you sometimes just often you do choose your own battles. You do pick your own battles. You were going to stay quiet because this is my paycheck. Like, I'm not going to fight this fight. It's no big deal, right? And you'll have that underlying animosity, like you were saying earlier. But at home, you can't do that. Right? That's not going to work. So I agree with you. I think that going through it, the first place you're going to do it is with family or whatever, or friends, or something that's maybe more emotional to you, right? That's going to have more of it. I mean, I got to assume there's so often people in their careers that they really don't like, and I talk about this all the time, that don't really like what they do and don't like really where they work. And finding that underlying thing is sometimes in these kind of cases, it's because I don't like how my boss doesn't listen to me or my team doesn't listen to me. So then I'm just going to stay quiet, right? Again, I'm going to stay in my lane.
Yeah, people check out.
Right. They check out and what is quiet quitting now, I think is what they call that term. So you're doing your job, but you're not really enjoying doing your job. And therefore, and Michael Morales and I, on our previous podcast, we talked about this. It's just, as a leader, you have to identify, wow, they're here, but they're really not doing what we intend for them to do. So that's another thing too. It's like, as a leader, you have to make that decision. You have to uncover that, right? It's not so much they're a Costanza. They're just, they're like a Kramer at that point. They're just
there's
falling
also
ass backwards into money, I think is the
for
term
me
from Kramer.
when I think about all the different personality types, or just the different variables in an individual's equation of what success is. And if we go back to, transparency. Oh yeah, we've got that.
Right.
Well, if you're appropriately letting, being transparent with the teams and all of your colleagues and everybody, and they understand their trajectory and where they're going and their place in that equation, that then, this is my variable in this equation and it equals this. If they don't have that, then, and again, going back to their personality type, some people don't have that, I need to figure this out. They need to be guided in a certain way. And if no one's helping them, then a pesky recruiter calls them and it's like, hey, how you doing? Oh, well, you called me, you got me on the right day. And then it's like, oh, well, what don't you like about, why are you looking? Oh, and then they list all these things. And it's like, really, I'm glad that I'm a recruiter and not Dr. Bob in that call, because
Right.
I'm about to make money on placing this guy. Dr. Bob would be like, well, let's rewind the tape here and let's
about that a little
dissect
bit more.
all those things. And then he's like, you know what? I actually work at a really fantastic place. It just has some, anyway, sorry. I went off on a little.
No, that's interesting. It just makes me think this. I mean, that's your favorite line. You caught me on the right day.
Right.
I mean, that's like,
that's gold.
that's right.
That's ching, ching, ching,
Yes.
for us. Yeah.
So I suppose a leader, particularly if we're talking about talented people, their objective is to make sure no day is the right day.
Right.
1,000%.
Right.
That is your job.
Right.
Yep.
Which, I mean, you talk about Michael. How do you do that? I mean, you have to be learning. There probably is no formula. There are probably touch points, things that work broadly, but every person brings a different set of needs, personality style, way of understanding things. As a leader, if you want to make sure no day is the right day for a recruiter, it probably means a couple things. I mean, it probably means that I have to know my people well enough to understand what's important to them and create an environment that supports that. And they have to be comfortable enough talking to me about the things that would cause them to say, you caught me on the right day, right? You don't want the recruiter to be the first person to hear about that.
Right.
Right.
If you're
Right.
a leader, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and
it often happens, right?
Right.
I mean, that's probably 99.9% companies that happens. So you have to accept that. But
Right.
it's still, to your point, a leader, that's the worst thing that could
Right.
happen to them.
'Cause also
man,
if
I've got a teammate that wants to leave.
Right.
Yeah,
What did
and
I
it-
do wrong? as
But
a
also,
leader?
I feel like if you're a good leader and you're doing your job and understanding your teammates, y'all might come to that conclusion together,
Right.
where it's like, as the leader, and then he's talking to his employee, and then they had that one-on-one where it's like, you know what, Pete, I don't think that what can I do to help you find your next move? Because we're not utilizing you
Right.
to your
Right.
your best, and we can't, because that's not this job. So to me, that's a phenomenal leader that understands
Right.
that, oh, you absolutely are good at a lot of things,
Right.
but somehow you got, and Mike Morales was talking about this also, that there was an individual doing this job and he ended up having to let this person go. And what happened after he let that person go, they were just kind of lukewarm in just doing the job, but they weren't excelling at it. They were just kind of coasting. Mike had to have a hard conversation. The guy was let go and ended up prospering, like
Getting out of completely
completely different industry and doing great.
Off he goes.
And it's, it's just,
But it is. Those are the hard conversations, right? And Michael's been working with you for a number of years.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember him, he talked a little bit about the conversation that you guys first had, where he was introduced to you through another individual.
Right.
And we can talk a little bit about this too, because he had said that you guys all got in a room and, just like different business units and talking like on a scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? And what would your teammates say about this? And he was talking also about his dad, and one of the things is like hiring, like how do you feel about hiring? How do you trust hiring? And I remember him saying like, George said something like 9 out of 10, right? And that's when Michael realized, this is, I'm okay. Like this, I've got, I think I'm the leader, I've got
Right.
this, right? But when you go into organizations like that, do you feel that it's almost going back into like saying, hey, how many people feel that they're, how important is transparency? Everybody raises their hand. How do you identify what's the truth in that, right? Do you feel that people will be honest about what they're saying or not so much, right? Like if I was going to say I want to scale 1 to 10, then
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of ways, but I mean, the glib answer is the videotapes.
It goes back.
It goes back to the video. I mean, I think people are sincere.
Well, you're a really good golfer. Let
Right.
me just see your swing.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
Dr.
shoot a
Bob's
60.
is like a litigator. It's like, can we bring back the tape?
that's right. That's right. And
This is Exhibit A.
usually this is
right
part,
at the 58-second mark
That's
and
right.
go. And
That's right.
there it is.
Yes.
There's the knife, and you killed a guy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You got to get the crime on video.
That's murder.
Yes. I mean, I come back
Just
to
fast
that.
forward to 58 seconds
Right.
real quick.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways you can measure this stuff and
Right.
it's valid and so on. But like there's something like what attracted me to this stuff with videotape is like you could take a personality test and it tells you your strengths and limitations. And that's really good to know. It's important.
Right.
And you can do a 360, where you're getting feedback from your colleagues. And that's really good to know. But people have a tremendous ability to explain away things that they don't like to hear.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so I'll come back to the video in a second, but Israel reminds me what we were just talking about. Like, I suppose that, I think we all would acknowledge that success isn't retaining all people all the time. Like there's necessary turnover.
Totally. Absolutely.
But the worst case for an organization is they have a talented person who's saying to Israel, you caught me on a good day, right? And why would that come as a surprise to a leader? Well, they haven't asked, or probably more commonly, they haven't created the conditions where someone would say it. Because here's the thing. I'm sure, this is a question for you, Israel. When they say, when they say you caught me on a good day, you say, well, tell me why.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is high up on that list is a conversation they just had with their boss or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Very high.
Very high, the highest, right?
Yeah.
And so if a leader's going to create an environment where they hear that before the recruiter, that means the leader has to be able to hear things about themselves that they believe are not true
Right.
and not get defensive.
Right.
That is so hard,
Oh, yes.
right? Because what we want to defend ourselves. I'm a good guy. I'm not a bad guy.
What are you talking about?
That's right. So we have to stay open, and that's so hard. That's what the videotapes show, that people are not open in the way they think they are. And it's not a 360 and it's not a personality test. It's you. Like, you disagree. Let's watch it again.
It's a 1 degree.
With
Hear the degree.
Right.
with the videotapes, and I know that you said that you're reading a footnote and then you
Yeah.
in there it took you. How many other is the videotape and the process that you do is that a norm for are a lot of other companies utilizing this
in the business?
Okay. I didn't know if it was.
No. I would say it's reasonably common in the public speaking / communication space.
But you're switching. You're using it in a different.
We're looking
way.
at it
Okay.
in
Everybody.
the problem solving space, basically.
And your company is
What's the next word in that phrase? I hear what you're saying.
But.
Oh yeah.
But I want to say this. It's people are making a claim that they're listening, but they aren't really listening. They aren't demonstrating it. So
It's the white man can't jump, like the Woody Harrelson. Like, you hear Jimi Hendrix, you don't listen to Jimi Hendrix. I always remember that line when I was a kid. I was like, oh, that's great.
that's right. Yeah, I hear your mouth moving, but I want to move my mouth. This is what people are usually doing.
Right. Over each
Yeah,
other. Right.
that's
Again,
over each other.
Here we go again.
That's right. Here we go again.
It's funny that you say that because growing up, when my dad would know that I wasn't listening and he was giving me, pearls of wisdom, life lessons, he immediately would be like, "What did I just say?"
Right. And you couldn't repeat it. You couldn't generate it.
No,
Right.
not at all.
But the whole time you're like this.
Blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
Dad. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people can go through the motions. They can do what's socially appropriate. You knew what you had to do to get through that conversation. Yeah, Dad. Right.
Being respectful.
That's right.
All the stuff.
You
Yeah.
weren't
Yes,
going to
sir.
get.
Yes, sir.
You
Oh,
weren't-
absolutely.
You weren't going to get sent to HR for that.
No.
Right. But you aren't. It's anti-learning. Right. And I think people do this all the time. It's
I
just
think it happens. I mean, I can imagine it happens so often.
Happens all the
And-
time.
And again, like it's going back to the hearing, right? I hear what you say, but I'm listening to what you're saying, and can we resolve it this way, or how do you think about it this way?
Yeah.
Then now it becomes an open
Right.
dialogue, which is where you're going into most meetings, especially ones that you call fairly closed off, right? Like again,
in the
like you were
sense
saying
that you've
earlier.
decided where the meeting needs to land.
Right.
I would
exactly.
say-
You said we talked about earlier. I want this solution. I've got to get to this solution. But right, how do I get to you to say yes? Right. Like in sales, our whole idea is getting to yes. Right. That's a good book.
I apply not listening at least 3 hours of my workday of just sure. Yeah. I don't even remember what.
Again, what do you say you do here? Circle back on that one, okay?
Let's put a pin in it.
Yeah. Let's. Yeah.
No, this has been fantastic. So we'll kind of start to wrap up a little bit stuff, but Dr. Bob, I'd love to kind of takeaways, like so for future leaders,
Yep.
not even leaders now,
Yeah.
but someone that wants to be a leader. And then the follow-up question to that is, I'm already a leader. How can I be more of an effective leader? And it could be the same lesson, but I think it may be slightly different because you've got that insecurity of being a leader, and then one that's already one that thinks they're really good.
Yeah.
But more importantly, are you having a good time?
Yes.
I
That's
am.
in closing.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
That is good.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of things. So let's see. Let's talk skills for a moment.
Perfect.
I think couple things. I think a lot of times people equate leadership or being effective with having answers. Oh, I know what to do here. Let's do this. And I love having answers. I mean, it feels really good to know what to do. But the fact of the matter is, if you're leading in any type of significant way, you're probably bumping up against challenges that you don't have a ready answer for. If I approach leadership as having answers and I don't have an answer, well, then I got a real problem on my hands. Either I have an answer or I'm not a leader, right? And if I live in that binary world, leadership equals having answers, well, then it's really hard to open up to other people about my confusion or my lack of certainty on which way to proceed. We see that as being weak in some way. And I don't think that's true. I think it is ineffective to say, I'm lost, tell me what to do. You can't be giving away authority like that as a leader. But I think you can assert authority as a leader through skilled learning, right? This idea of win and be right, coming in with the answer. We act as if our authority comes from our content, knowing things. I think authority can also come from our process. Do I know how to create an environment where we can learn together and come to a good decision that people buy into? Yep. It doesn't have to come from me as a leader. I'm responsible for making sure we get there.
Right.
And it probably serves me in the organization to access the right people in getting there. Right. That begins with being able to admit, I don't know the answer.
Yep.
If we can't admit that, then we end up isolating ourselves in the very moment we need help.
Yeah. And the teammates and the team members.
That's right.
Like everybody.
And you're actually role modeling. You're failing to role model an environment where you can be a leader and not have answers.
Right.
Right.
Empower.
That's right.
Your people. Right.
That's right. So I think that's a really important lesson for me, that we are at our most powerful. If we're faced with a really complex problem, we're at our most powerful if we're able to share authority with other people in skilled ways. And that comes from good learning. And that's what some of the videotape work is about. Another very technique-y piece of advice I'd give is this. People want to come in with the answers. We've talked, you're sick of hearing me say this.
No, not really. We'll edit a lot of it out.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe he's about to say this again.
That's right. That's right. Why are you pressing that record button? I think that we have to earn the right to intervene. What do I mean by that? I think where people get sideways, this back and forth kind of thing, it's because your definition of the problem is different than my definition of the problem. I'm solving for my version, and my solution looks like a problem to you, and your solution looks like a problem to me. In that environment, I think we have to slow down, and before I earn the right to start to problem solve, I need to demonstrate that I understand your version of the problem. How do you do that? Well, you keep going. I mean, that's why your dad asked you, well, what did I just say, Israel? Yeah. What would have shut him up is if you played back what he said, and he'd be like, yeah, that's exactly right.
Man, Israel, you were paying attention.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's that exactly. And that's a lot harder to get than you think. So I'd say if people want to get better at listening, look for that exactly in a conversation. How do you get the exactly? You play back their sentiment with such precision that it sounds like something they would say, which doesn't mean you agree with them.
Getting them to say exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
like
I'm
saying concretely, some version of exactly. That's right. I can't believe it. That's exactly what I'm saying.
The best one is saying to them, what I'm hearing you say is this, and then you put your spin on it at the end.
Agree.
And so you never said the word but. You never did any of those things.
Wordplay here, Israel.
It's literally they're telling you something, and as a leader, you're even
accepting it.
Yep.
Right.
I hear you.
Demonstrating that you hear them.
Yep. And what I'm hearing you say, and then asked if that is correct. Am I understanding what you're saying?
That's the key.
And then when they say yes,
because if I don't feel that you're understanding it, I'm still going to be like, actually,
That's
no,
not it. That's not
right.
it.
But then
That's your version of what I said.
because
I
now
need you to get to
that
our
individual,
version. Right?
that individual feels heard. They're all pumped up. It's like, oh my gosh, he did hear me or she did hear me. And then it's like, okay, well, now that we have that established, let's take that and now you can guide it in, the appropriate
To the
directions, I guess.
solution. Right.
Well, and I would offer that, maybe it's the listener that ends up changing more,
Sure.
right? That
And
wait a minute,
Oftentimes.
right? And as I understand what Pete is saying, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I hadn't considered that.
Right.
I start to move. I'm no longer stuck on, well, this meeting needs to end up here.
Because also, yeah, if then you ask, am I understanding you correctly? And then the other individual says, no, you're not. And then
That's
they
the
get
best
another
answer.
opportunity to and then it's like, oh, there's the clarity with both parties.
It's all a home moment.
Right.
You're trying to get to that.
Yeah. Versus, yep, okay. And not only did the individual not hear anything the person said, even if they did hear, it's not what the other person was still trying to communicate.
Right.
And
It happens all the time.
yeah.
I tell people, we love to get that exactly, but it's even more valuable to get, no, that's not it,
Yeah.
right? Because then you save yourself from having marched down a path based on a misunderstanding.
Awesome.
That is awesome.
Dr. Bob, everybody, just
yeah.
making
So
the
those are
world a better place.
So anyway, any more rules that you'd want to, or things you want to share to?
Yeah, maybe last thing I'd say, it's an illusion to think that right wrong is going to solve anything, because it just sets us up as adversaries, and it's not. Getting alignment between sales and finance is not as easy as a right wrong, even though our minds tell us I'm right, you're wrong. What the answers lie in, I think, growing into a more holistic understanding of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's you often you can't. I believe if you're caught in this here we go again loop, you can't solve the problem from your definition of it. Your definition isn't big enough to enlist the support of other people. If you want to lead, it oftentimes means coming up with a definition of the problem that people can recognize as true. Because once you get to a shared definition of the problem, that's where we could start to be partners. If we're trying to solve a different problem, then we have different criteria for solutions. We're going to be adversaries. So you got to grow out of the issue. You can't arm wrestle your way out of the issue. You got to grow your way out of the. Unless you have big arms, and you can arm wrestle your way out of the issue. But I don't. So
I don't think any of us do.
right.
No.
So you got to grow your way out. And how do you do that? You listen to the other person because they've got some truth over there.
Yep.
It doesn't mean everything they say is true, but there's probably something legitimate over there. And oftentimes that changes our understanding of what's really going on.
Yep. Agreed. Now, Dr. Bob, this has been fantastic. I can't wait to share this with our audience and everybody else. And I know one time we talked about this, and I want to encourage you to do this because this is one of the ideas that you and I had months ago. In one of the sessions, you dropped a choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
And I remember, and you were laughing because I remember it stuck with me because I think everyone at this table, I remember growing up with choose your own adventure books. I had pretty much all of them and I love them. And I think that you should definitely do it because it's such a good idea because you can take different pathways. And if you kind of did it as a choose your own adventure, people would really take to it. So
Yeah.
I can't remember what we called it. We had a name for it.
we did.
Choose your own adventure.
No, well, it was a choose your own.
Brilliant.
We got it.
Trademark.
I'm gonna actually. I'm gonna. If I find that because we did a book cover. If you
Right.
remember,
Yeah, you sent that
I
to me.
sent that book. If I find that book cover, we'll just go ahead and tease it on this podcast.
Yeah.
It will be released
Yeah.
because it's a fantastic book cover.
In the future.
Yeah. In the future, when we release this, in a few weeks or whatever, you will. I'm going to share this out to the entire audience. So, and I really hope you take that advice.
Choose your own future.
Yes.
It was good. It was good.
Yeah.
But no, thanks again for being here, my friend.
Yeah,
Great to see you.
It's an honor to be invited and spend some time with you guys.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much. Well, we'll see you next time.
Yes.
See you in the
Jacksonville.
funnies.
Yes.
See you in the funnies.
Hey, so that is a wrap for the show. Just really want to spend just a minute and thank Buzzsprout for all the support and utilizing their platform, and of course the Buzzsprout Studio in San Marco in Jacksonville, Florida. Thank you to Varick Rossetti for the amazing design and logo that you did, and then also thanks to Rick Collado and Hurricane Party for providing the music that we all have an opportunity to listen to. And then thanks again to all the listeners and the supporters and the family. So couldn't have done this without you.
See you on the next cast.